will be a Google link. We won't use your data for anything other than the network operations. But if you're interested, that's how you can sign up at the end. Okay, so I will now pass over to Itu to just give you a very brief overview of what the network is all about.
Oh, thank you, Karina, and good afternoon. I'm taking it in terms of time zones. All of us are in an afternoon, a mode, or possibly into evening. Once again, welcome everybody, and thanks for making time, to come in and be, a part of, this session, this afternoon with Peter Vundla. About the Pan-African Leaders Networking Forum. This initiative, was started 3 or 4 years ago, and the whole objective, behind it really, has been to get young people, on the African continent, young professionals, in particular, to begin to get together, network with one another, and actually have a full understanding and a sense, of what it is, that is actually going on the African continent, than necessarily having to be reading about it or, getting snippets of it, from outside, the continent. So it is very crucial that wherever we are, on the African continent, we begin to know one another, understand what we are doing, and we will all recall or have an appreciation that for over decades and centuries, somehow we have been divided, and it's very crucial, that we come back, together and begin to chart a course, of strength and honor, for our own continent, going into the future, So that's part of the objective, for the Pan-African Leaders Networking Forum. Yes, we can begin, by, chatting with one another, understanding what you're doing, and these things take time. It is not like, in the space of 6 to 12 months, all of us will be engaging, roughly, with one another. It's something that we need to build foundations and ensure that we build on those foundations into the future. I mean, the likes of Peter Vundla and others on the continent, have laid beautiful foundations for us, in all spheres, be it business, politics, or in the arts, you name it all. And it really is up to us now, to make sure, now that the baton has been passed on, the torch has been passed, to make sure that we run with it, but most importantly, to realize that we are all Africans, and it's very, very crucial that we work with one another, for the development and advancement of our continent. I think I will stop there, Karina, and I will wait upon you to let me, as and when, as program director, you'd like me to introduce our guest. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Itu. So we're just going to quickly introduce, I'm going to pass over to Mara to introduce each of the network leads. So how it works is that there's someone in Kenya, someone in Ghana, and South Africa that try to coordinate this network today. So I'll pass over to Miru right now.
All right, thank you so much, Karina. I've got the wonderful task of introducing all of the expos as well as the guest to this particular webinar. Starting first and foremost, I'd like to say that the profiles are available in the chat function of the webinar, so you can read along with me. However, to begin with, our host this afternoon, Karina Kimbi, is an African Research University Alliance Migration PhD Fellow from the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, better known as WITS. Over the last 7 years, she's worked for private and public and non-governmental organizations in Accra, Lagos, and London with a focus on youth development and TVETs. Her passion is about mobility, mobile planning, youth skill development, and job creation, in particular West Africa. Myself, I am a business person, an entrepreneur, as well as a consultant in the marketing field. I've got a real passion with building businesses that build Africa and working with entrepreneurs. I come from a background of entrepreneurial management, marketing management, with a postgraduate diploma in business administration. Also on the EXCO for South Africa is Jeanette Masarumule, who's an operational excellence professional. She's an industrial engineer, and with over 9 years of working experience across several industries. She's got an engineering degree in industrial engineering from the University of Pretoria, a master's in management for business excellence from the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom. She is a Chevening, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, 2018, 2019, and IGRISE alumni for 2003. From Kenya, Nairobi, there's Wakesho Kililo, who is an advocate in the High Court of Kenya with human rights experience and was named Civil Society Lawyer of the Year for 2019 First Runners Up. We also have Koketso Lehobe on the call. She's also EXCO from South Africa, a risk management professional, internal auditing honors from the University of Pretoria, and business administration with the University of Witwatersrand Business School. She's a risk manager within the financial market field at a leading global bank. Her passion is transformation and mentorship. Our guest this afternoon or this evening is the Admirable Peter Vundla, who is an entrepreneur and an author. He's a living legend, and we're very, very pleased to have him on this webinar. He's a South African author that formed the first South African Black-owned advertising agency, Herd Boys, in the early 90s. He also then co-founded Pamodzi, mid-90s and 96, which then took up a stake in African Merchant Bank, now AMB Capital in the business banking world. He's executive deputy chairperson for AMB Capital. He serves on several boards and continues to be a major proponent for Black economic empowerment as chairperson of the Presidential Working Group and the Black Business Executive Circle. His books include Doing Time, and without any further ado and taking more time from our host Karina, I'm going to hand over to her to get the proceedings underway with the conversation with Mr. Peter Vundla. Over to you, Karina.
Thank you, Maro, for a comprehensive introduction to all of us, and of course to Peter. I'm quickly going to say that there may be connectivity issues because we're in prime time South African time, and in Ghana we just generally have some connectivity issues, so it may be that we come in and out. So if I end up dropping off as host, Maro will take over, or likewise. And so for those that may have missed it, of course we're speaking with Peter today about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is imperative for the future of Africa. I think we can all acknowledge it's not going to provide all the jobs, but it definitely will help. We've got very large informal sectors, and with the absence of often strong government, we may need to look to African entrepreneurs as the pioneers for our future. We're currently in the current health pandemic, which so far has not hit the continent. Impact of it and the impact it will have on the global economy will. But we're not the only ones to go through tough times, and I hope Peter will allude to his own experience of tough times, particularly in the early 90s, when he started Herd Boys in South Africa, in our overview today. So I'll quickly pass over to Peter to say hello, and then we'll start with our round of questions.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Karina, and thank you very much, for inviting me to your webinar. And I'm hoping all of you will get something out of this, going forward, and then we can, as Itu said, begin to talk about the advancement, development, and prosperity of our beloved continent. So I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, perfect. So I thought we could start off by discussing whether entrepreneurship is for everybody. So from my own understandings of your history, you're from fairly humble beginnings, and you worked hard in the advertising industry in Ogilvy before starting Herd Boys in 1991. So given your own history, do you think entrepreneurs are born or can they be made?
Yeah, well, firstly, just a slight correction here. With all modesty, I'm actually not from a humble background, compared to my compatriots and my peers, the people I grew up with. So I came from a middle-class family, which was a bit unheard of, in South Africa when I grew up. So I thought I should just correct that. So certainly a disadvantaged background, given that I am Black and I was born into apartheid. So in many, many ways, then I was so much disadvantaged. But to come to your question, Karina, I always wonder, when you say entrepreneurs born or created, I've always wondered, why that question? Why do we ask that question? What is the relevance of that question? And maybe you need to enlighten me on that. But if I may, I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a bit of both, in the sense that even if you are not, even if you are born an entrepreneur, entrepreneurship is a learning experience. So there's an element of creation in that learning experience. You are learning all the time. You're learning as you go. This is what entrepreneurship about. There are no stock answers, and it's almost like touch and go, and the chopping and changing, and it's like it's not a straight road. You got to halt and drive and wait and watch, and so it's a bit of both. I think both created and also born. So I hope that answers your question. In spite of the fact that I'm not sure what its relevance.
I suppose the reason why it's often asked is because some people feel that entrepreneurship is not for them. And that is not for them. And entrepreneurship is only for a certain type of potentially very vivacious or, intelligent people. And so I think specifically within African economies, what we can see is particularly in the informal sector, there are many entrepreneurs that wouldn't consider themselves such. It might be that you started off a small stall, etc. So I suppose that brings us into the question of whether entrepreneurs are born or made, or whether anyone can in fact be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, well, I don't think all of us can be entrepreneurs, if that is the question that is expected, if I may say so. We have seen people who would fall on bad times, either through a retrenchment or basically losing a job or anything or something like that. And then they believe, or taking a package and say, okay, now I got there a few $100,000, I'm going to go into business. And suddenly they think they can be entrepreneurs just overnight. And as we know, many such people have lost their monies. And you will see somebody who, for example, has been an ex-teacher or a nurse and reaches a certain stage where they want to reinvent themselves in terms of earning a living, and then they go into business thinking that they can be entrepreneurs, and then they invariably fail. So yeah, in that sense, entrepreneurs are not born. Yes, you're not born an entrepreneur, and neither can you be made an entrepreneur.
But it's very much part of the experience, is what I take from that. I suppose that leads on to the next kind of question. You must have had many ideas, or perhaps you did not, before you started Herd Boys. What makes an idea a business? What moves it from being a business plan to the actual?
Well, first, I mean, how is an idea born? I think if you look at how we started Herd Boys, we did some desk research, some formal research, and we saw a need in the marketplace for an agency that basically understood all markets in South Africa. And there was no such ad agency, given that these were all white establishments who had no clue about Black consumer behavior, for example. And so we felt there was a need to be satisfied. So that is the idea. There has to be a need or a niche. I think I've disappeared a bit there. Hey.
You have, but we can still hear you.
Oh, okay. I think the idea is there has to be, so there was a niche, and I'm using the word niche not in the sense everybody does, that niche meaning small, but a gap really in the marketplace which needed to be filled. And so it was just an idea. So how do we convert that into a business, to come to your question? So we looked at, obviously, how are we going to organize this business, and organize not in a textbook kind of way, because entrepreneurship is not about textbook formulas. And like I've indicated, it's on the go, touch and go stuff, and you improvise as you go, and you do with what little you have to create something. I mean, that's what entrepreneurship is about. And it's really about being gutsy, it's about intuition, it's about instinct, it's about belief in oneself, it is about sacrifice, and all of those things then combine to create this business. And obviously it would need to be funded, it would need skills, it would need obviously some expertise, it would need all of those things then begin to form a business. So the idea then becomes a business, and there are many things that make up this business, and I've just mentioned a few of those, and some of which will come through our discussion as we go.
Perfect. So I suppose that leads, and you definitely picked up on the fact you have to have expertise in order to start a business. From your experience, do you have to be an industry expert in order for a business initially, or in its first or its infant years, to be successful? Or is seeing a gap in the market and then having the foresight to do something about it enough?
I think industry experience helps, but it's not a sine qua non, and not an indispensable function. I mean, I know entrepreneurs who are not doctors, for example, but they run medical aid schemes, they hire doctors and so on. But I think you have to have some one-on-one medicine, to be able to manage those doctors. But no, I don't think industry expertise is necessary. But in the ad business, it's an interesting question, because when Head Boys started being successful, then there was a kind of herd mentality from other Black business people who thought they could emulate or imitate what we had done, but they didn't have the skills or expertise in marketing or advertising. And they thought it was just a run of the mill, that they could just come in and do it, And that set us apart, because we were practitioners in advertising and they were not. And because they didn't have this industry expertise, clearly they, all of them fell by the wayside. And what made us different was this industry expertise. So I think in some sectors or markets, I think industry expertise certainly helps. And if you don't have it, but at least you should have at least some inkling or just one-on-one industry expertise. You cannot just simply get into a sector or market you don't understand, obviously.
And so you were already working in advertising. You'd come up with this idea.
Just say that again, Karina.
So you were already working in advertising, as we discussed before you started Herd Boys.
I had 10 years experience, yes.
In Ogilvy. So what made you think, okay, now is the time? When did you think, let me leave Ogilvy and do this on my own?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me? I see you're frozen, Karina.
I can hear you.
Hello.
You're also frozen for me, but I can hear you. I think we're back.
Yeah, okay, I'm back now. I think, I did say last week that my internet is a bit unstable. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. The timing, right? And whenever is a great time, really. And I think it just takes guts. One is to be opportunistic. You have to be aware of what's happening around you. You have to understand that you may not have an income for some time to come. Your lifestyle or your standard of living is going to be dropping. So you must be prepared for all of that, and that you're going to lose your lovely corner office. You're going to lose your secretary. In our instance, we were given these white secretaries, which made us feel like we're the big men of Africa, And so one must be ready to, to give up all of those trappings. But very importantly, coming to Herd Boys, Karina, our timing was interesting in the sense that Mandela was soon to be released. The country was changing. The so-called black market, which I subsequently called the main market, was beginning to grow in expenditure, and white establishment agencies, like I indicated, were becoming more and more foolish in terms of communicating with with black consumers. Not just foolish, but almost offensive in their approach to this main market. And so all of those things combined to make it to the title of my book. The timing also had to do with the fact that I had done time. I had a track record. My name was known. I wasn't just fly by night. And like I indicated, I'd been in the business 10 years. I had a good track record as a client service person, and my future customers knew about me and my expertise. So the timing was right in that sense as well.
And so I suppose you started in '91. It was a difficult time in South Africa, but that wasn't your only hurdle. So having read excerpts from your book, I understand that in the initial years, Herb Boys had great financial difficulty. So I was wondering if you could speak a little on, or not difficulty, but struggles in raising capital. And I know that's an issue that many South African and African businesses generally have to date. So I was wondering if you could speak a little on raising your finance, potentially some of the difficulties, and then advice you might have for budding entrepreneurs or perhaps people that already have businesses in place.
Yeah, actually, there was no funding of Head Boys in the first place, funding in the classical sense of the word. Head Boys was self-funded. And also not self-funded, I'm not using the word self-funded again in the classical sense, in the sense that we took money out of our pockets. Self-funded in the sense that we gave up being salaried. We gave up our lifestyles. We lowered our standards of living. We made do with little. We multitasked. You know, we were secretaries, client service. You know, we're just doing everything we could do. We cut costs to the bone, and we basically went for 6 months without salaries. So that's where what I'm talking about, self-funding. Because before then, we had given up on. We went to our future competitors, hoping that they would fund us. That didn't come about. We went to established banks, nothing. We went to wealthy individuals, that came to naught. We approached a group of doctors who had a Stokvel type of organization to fund us. That came to nothing because, you know, they just couldn't understand what we were talking about. They just kind of laughed us off. And so we were not funded at all. We had no funding, absolutely none. But by the grace of God, as time went on, we began to make some money. And then the self-funding continued in the sense that we would, as I say in my book, we would look at, and this is just the 5 partners. At the end of the month, we would look at who had the most need amongst us. And he or she, it was a he, it was just Guy Fave, unfortunately. Well, as it happens. So we would look at who had the most need at the end of the month, and that person then would get the bulk of most of the money that was available for remuneration. Yeah, so that was the process we went through when it came to funding, and also as we grew, talking about funding, we then we created a nice balance sheet, and I think some 3 years later we were able to apply and get an overdraft from established banks as we grow. And even then again, it was more like a leap of faith on the part of these banks, and it was really a matter of relationships, personal relationships I had with some decision makers inside that particular bank. But ordinarily, if it was any other person, black person, they probably wouldn't have bothered to give us the overdraft.
So it's very much at that point about using your own resources or giving up all that you could in order to invest in the business, and then using your personal connections. But I know you have extensive experience in investment, and so from that,
let's repeat that.
You have extensive experience in investment. So from that perspective, do you have any advice for businesses on how to look for capital or where to look for it? And I suppose in that same question, how principled should people be when they're trying to raise money for their business. So you were the first Black advertising agency in South Africa. So and I know that you've been a strong advocate for Black empowerment since. And I know that a number of funds for SMEs starting up are not based on the continent. And I know that brings up a number of questions about the future and specifically the ownership of those businesses long term. Do you have anything, you know, that you could advise with regards to that? So about being principled in where you look for your funding and potentially where you could look for that.
Yeah, you know, funding businesses is the biggest hurdle when it comes to starting a business. And an obvious starting point is obviously, I think, most African countries have developmental banks, such as we have in South Africa, whether it's the National Empowerment Fund or the IDC or the Development Bank of South Africa, which also funds businesses on the continent. So that's the starting point. And then there are areas such as, you look at venture capital, for example, which is still a developing financial services entity on the continent. But you know, you do find, especially venture capitalists in the technology business, and then you would look at also private companies such as business partners here in South Africa, and I don't know about others on the continent. And then there are also, as a source, wealthy individuals one could approach, you know, committed individuals who do want to support young Black people. And then there are also areas such as, you know, the IDC has a unit, I know, which has to do with technology. And if you come up with an idea, a tech idea, they have a 1 million rand tech grant. It's a grant, it's not even a loan. And not too many people know about that facilities. And what other sources can one begin to look at? And I think there's also perhaps international, I think I'm going now again.
No, you're with us.
Oh, I'm still there, okay. I think there are also international sources one could begin to tap into. And then also, one could tap into one's relatives and so on, and family. And in a way, as head boys, we tapped into family in the sense that gratification was totally gone, and we used to visit each other, you know, the partners. I would go to one of my partners' home when, say, Happy's home, for example, where I knew that I would not be offered an Amstel as a beverage, but maybe a drink such as Oros. So self-gratification was, we gave up on gratification altogether. So in a way, that's also part funding. You've got to give up on certain things. Gratification must be postponed, especially material gratification. That must be postponed way, way beyond. Do not, it's also kind of funding, Karim. I've always said, you know, one of the nicest things I've always told young people is, do not spend money you have not earned. In a way, that's a kind of funding as well, a kind of saving. Do not spend money you have not earned. And I think if most people in the world understood that, you know, I think we'd be, most of us, very, very happy people. Do not spend money you have not earned. And that's a kind of saving, and saving is funding in a manner of speaking too.
I think that's a very good piece of advice specifically for us. At least for myself, I think you can get caught up, especially with the access to credit. Specifically personal credit, you can often find yourself spending money that you just don't have and believing it's essentially your own. And I think that's also relevant when it comes to business sometimes. I'm just going to move over
Let
to
me just add something else as well. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem.
You know, you will not believe this, but I've seen even people with formal education, with MBAs, who should know the difference between turnover and profit. Who should know? They should know that, but they don't. In actual fact, the way they behave like turnover is profit. It's revenue is not profit. Out of that revenue, probably your profit, depending on what business you are in, depending on what margins you work on, most of that belongs to the taxman, it belongs to suppliers. You must pay your staff, you must pay your rent, your electricity. But they look at that and say, wow, I've got 100,000 in the bank. It's not profit, it belongs to somebody else. Don't spend it, you have not earned it. Very important. Big difference between profit and turnover.
So it also sounds like you're speaking there to financial literacy when it comes to business.
Absolutely, you have to have that. And if not, you know, to your earlier question about industry expertise, I think it's very important that you surround yourself with people who you think are better than you and pay them more than you. Like I used to, creative directors, I had some people who were earning more than me. And these are the creative directors, people I needed. And so I owned the business. And it doesn't mean that because I own the business, then I must pay myself the most. You know, so yeah, it's important that you surround yourself with you know, people who are better than you, and surround yourself with you know, with winners all the time.
Well, I think that's really important. I'm just going to switch over to the chat. If we can, Miru, are you around?
Yeah.
We've got a number of questions that I think he's just going to pose to you, Peter, both on funding and finance, and also on starting a business.
Yeah, I'm going to start off with one of the first few questions for Peter there from Ebatels Cordo. I'm not sure which country.
From Ghana.
Is he from Ghana? Okay, he'd like to know what would be the importance of cross-continental networking in setting out on one's entrepreneurship journey.
You disappeared there for quite a while there, Maru. You're going to have to repeat that, please. I disappeared.
Ebatels Kodo from Ghana would like to learn what would be the importance of cross-continental networking when one goes on their own entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, you know, I think we need more trans-border cooperation on the continent, and we tend not to be continental in outlook, not since Nkwame Nkrumah spoke about a united Africa, which has been put you know, along the way, because Africa's problem has always been a leadership problem. That's our biggest plight as a continent. So I think cross-continental cooperation is important, and one needs to start at a regional level, such as a SADC, or is it ECOWAS, or, you know, all of those regional bodies, because those regions are not just thumbsuck type regions. There's some commonalities, initial commonalities one could begin to work with, especially, I mean, if you, let me talk about something I quite understand, and I suspect it is so for other economic regions on the continent, where there are some commonalities and you could break down the no visa requirements, no, none of that nonsense, because these are all artificial borders actually created in Berlin, as we all know. So I think the cross-border cooperation is a given, and let me tell you something I read the other day was that Africa is the youngest continent on the planet, and that when we deal with China, for example, which has now become the second most powerhouse in terms of their economy, that we should not deal with China as individual countries. Like, you know, Ghana deals on a one-to-one, South Africa one-to-one with China and so on. But that our 1.3 billion people on our continent must, as a unit, as a continent, deal with China, not as individual countries. And this is that's how we become an economic force. And there's a 1.3 billion rand market, and things like food production, you know, resources that are required by China and so on. But if we're going to be dealing with China on an individual level, then China will actually begin to own some of our countries, such as they do, where they now own various utilities in some of our countries. So yeah, cross-border, I mean, one cannot gainsay that. It's absolutely crucial.
Wow. Thank you for that, Peter. I just want to add to all the participants that we are noting the questions that are coming through. We've got roughly over 40 participants on this particular call. So questions are flooding in. The next question comes from Stella out in Kenya. And Stella would like to know, what is the one resource that entrepreneurs ignore in these times?
A resource. Yeah, why one? I'm not sure why one. Perhaps it means the most important resource. You know, my daughter taught me something some years ago when we started looking at what appears to be the innate entrepreneurship of Jewish people. Apparent, innate, and as you know. And she said to me, and I strongly believe this, and I'd like to share with you, that Jewish people, given the inordinate influence they have around the world, and given their numbers, are successful for two reasons. Firstly, they network. They network. A Jewish lawyer will send you to a Jewish dentist, the dentist will send you to a pharmacist, the pharmacist will send you to the Jewish tailor, and so on and so forth. So networking is absolutely important. Then the second thing is, in the Jewish community, is the matter of mentorship. So those two things, this is what makes them world leaders in architecture, in medicine, in the arts, and there's so few of them, but the influence they have, I believe in South Africa, there are no more than 250,000 of them, but if you look at the influence they have in the economy, in the arts, and so on, then you'll begin to understand that yes, it has to be the networking and the mentorship, which thing we need very badly as African people. So it's not just the one, then, Stella. It's both. It's two. I think mentorship and networking. Because let me add something as well. Networking also has to do with something I've also patterned my life along. And I repeat this all the time, that entrepreneurship, like life, is about relationships. Relationships. You need to build and nurture relationships. I'm talking about relationships with your family, your community, your government, your taxman, your supplier, your customer, your staff. Just if those relationships are taken care of, I cannot see how you can fail. So relationships, I think, are central to the success of anyone or any business in life. Relationships. So if you look after those relationships, ensure that you're okay with your taxman, your suppliers, and you're in good standing order with your customers. Your suppliers are happy with you, you pay them on time. Your bank understands you, you don't run away from your bank, you answer their call. So you just nurture, it's relationships. Not, guys, probably this is the most important thing I'll ever say to you. Build and nurture those relationships. Yes, that's it, yeah.
Wow, I was shook there. I think there was huge reference to the networking element, bringing back to how a spiderweb doctrine needs to be also implemented as entrepreneurs, that we need to be able to connect authentically with other people, including suppliers, bankers, as you mentioned, but more importantly, having authentic relationships amongst ourselves. I just want to...
Let me just add something there as well. So sorry, Maru.
Of course.
Talking about relationships is also about, I found, to an earlier question I think Karima asked me about funding. Another way to start business, and it has to do with relationships as well. When we start businesses, we tend to have this ownership thing that it is mine, I cannot share it with anybody. But I've found that sometimes to fund a business, you have to collaborate or get into alliances with others who have already, who would not just bring strategic input into your business, but also bring in the capital. And this is based on the fact that I've always said, and you guys must remember this, that 5% of a working company is better than 100% of a company that is not working. So do not be averse to, even in the beginning, bringing in partners who would, like I've said, bring in the capital or become just basically strategic partners. So alliances and collaboration, partnerships and so on are something one could begin to look at in terms of that earlier question on funding that was raised.
Definitely. When it comes to relationship, I think it's one of those broad elements of being an entrepreneur, being in business. And as a pioneer, I think you would be the perfect example of that. We've got quite a number of questions from different parts of Africa, from Kenya, from Ghana, from Nigeria, and even South Africa. So what I would propose is that, in the interest of time, that perhaps I read out the questions that we currently have, and then you could maybe answer them. Perhaps a lot of them might be interdependent. And then maybe I'll hand over to Karina as well to let us know where we are in terms of the themes. So first things, after Stella, we got, am I still good?
No, Maru, on you go.
Okay. All right. So on the list, we've got Karabo from South Africa, who asked, how crucial is the role of mentorship in business success? And would you encourage us as a startup to become part of a business incubator?
Yes, no doubt.
Yeah. So then also in Nigeria, we've got Tayo Lori in Lagos. He says, in working in capital intensive industry, such as real estate, securing funding from banks is difficult without having collateral, and interest rates are very high. What other ways can one secure funding, especially for capital intensive industry? And Silas Mateba, I believe this would be in South Africa, asks, what are Africa's unique advantages in increasingly globalized market? What can Africa bring to the table that no one else has, i.e. China, India have numbers, America or Europe have mature technology and mature funding structures. Katinya in Kenya says, talking due to the record of the COVID-19 pandemic, what piece of advice would you give to someone who's currently employed but had planned to start his or her business this year? I think at this point, we're just going to capture those questions. And then I would also encourage the participants to keep sending in those questions. The ones that couldn't be attended to in this particular webinar will definitely raise, and God willing, we'll have Peter back someday to answer some of them as well. So over to you, Karina and Peter.
Yeah, let me, okay, are you going to go first?
No, Peter, on you go. I suggest that you potentially try and merge some of the answers or select one or two. And then those that are not answered, Peter's going to provide his contact details after the call so that they could follow up after, just for the sake of time. I think we'll run over by potentially 5 minutes, but I'm conscious that we're near the end of the hour.
Yeah, because I am happy, after this webinar, you guys have my email, and I can actually answer some of those questions by way of email to those individual people who have the questions. But just to start off with that last question about starting a business now during these COVID-19 days, right? It's actually quite amazing. I'm starting with that question because I think I have an answer to it, and it's something I thought I would conclude my presentation with. Maru, who has that last question again? What is the name again? Who wants to start a business this year? What was the name?
It's a question from Nairobi, Kenya, from Kitinya. I hope I'm pronouncing it.
Yeah. Now, Kitinya, I have a quote here, and I was going to finish off my presentation with this quote, and it's a quote by Jack Ma, the chairman of Alibaba, and this is what he says. I saw this quote only yesterday, and it says, Katima, for people in business, the year 2000 is really just a year for staying alive. Don't even talk about your dreams or plans. Just make sure you stay alive. If you can stay alive, then you would have made a profit already. How's that?
That's top notch. That's top notch. I don't know.
I saw, and I thought, I think that kind of, hopefully that answers the question. Although I wouldn't say, don't even talk about your dreams or your plans. Do talk about them. But the point is that we all, especially you young people, We must just stay alive, hey. Already made a profit. And it's about just deferring everything else and keeping safe and ensuring that you stay alive in order for you to realize your dreams. Okay, then the other question is rather a tough one, I might add, that has to do with about the unique advantages our continent has and what China has and what the US had. I would venture to say that more than any other continent, I think we have the natural resources. You know, we have the forests, we've got the gold, we've got the diamonds, and it is our natural resources that keep the global economy going, if you think about it. London, New York, Beijing is nothing without our resources. You look at their stock exchanges, it's all about our resources. We keep their countries running through our resources. That's what makes us unique. We have coal, we've got things they need to run their economies. So we must not just be exporting these. I think we must begin to develop and add value to all of those resources we're producing in our own country, the uranium and all of those things. I think it's called beatification. What's the word that helped me here? Is what I'm looking for. But it's really about adding value instead of just exporting these. And I think the second advantage we have, I've talked about our numbers in terms of our population, that I mean, there's something like 1.5 billion of us, big market, lots of people. And I think also the character of our people, which unfortunately is not backed by good political leadership. But I think our unique advantage is really who we are as a people, and also the natural resources you know, we have on our continent. Yeah, I think those are the two questions. I mean, Karaba's one is, I mean, mentorship is a given. I think I've answered that one, and yeah.
Okay, thank you, Peter, so much for that. I'm definitely hoping to stay alive beyond the COVID pandemic in order for, and many of us, in order to achieve our dreams. I suppose that leads us to the conclusion of this webinar, but I wondered if you could leave us with one last piece of advice on the basis of all your experience in business. What would you say to us if we're starting up, or if we are already in business? What would be your one lesson that you would leave us with?
Hey, a difficult one. There are many, Karima, and it's not just the one. And then again, there are no stock answers to entrepreneurship. There are no stock answers. And one has to, when you get into entrepreneurship, you must begin to understand that you are on your own, and it's not going to be easy. You are on your own, it's not going to be easy. I see in South Africa young entrepreneurs believing that their fortunes rest with being card-carrying members of the ANC. You know, they go to branch meetings and all that kind of nonsense and graduate themselves to politicians. And you're on your own, and you do not rely on your government to help you. Entrepreneurship is about standing on your feet and begin to understand that it is not going to be easy. That's all I can say, Karina. Thanks.
Okay, so you'll leave us with that we need to be hardworking and we need to endure the tough.
Oh, it looks like I'm on my own, yeah. Oh,
yeah,
there you are.
So we're back. I'm going to pass over to Lakisho just to give our vote of thanks. We're really appreciative for your time today. I'm conscious we didn't get through all the questions in the chat function, but as I mentioned, there's two things. So Peter will leave his email address, but it'll also be the WhatsApp chat that will continue after, and the link on how to join the network will follow just in the next 1 to 2 minutes before the conversation ends. So thank you so much, Peter. We really appreciate your time, but I'm going to pass over to Wakisho and Kenya so that she can
very much. Let me start off by thanking everyone for taking your time to be a part of this meeting today. I'd really love to send a shout out to everyone from Kenya especially. Thank you for joining us. There are about 19 of you who took the time to come. Joshua, Oliver, Riziki, Elvis, Caroline, Juma, Matthew, Flavia, Silas and Diana, Kitinia, Gerald, Chege, Stella, Marge. Thank you so much for joining us. I also want to thank everyone else from Ghana. We had people in from South Africa. We also had people in from Tanzania. And there's also one who was watching us from Dubai. So thank you very, very much. Second, I want to thank the speaker. I mean, this has just been amazing. I've taken so much on the importance of building relationships, the importance of networking, the importance of mentorship, and don't spend more than, don't spend money that you haven't earned. I feel like I have learned so much this 1 hour on entrepreneurship, and we really hope that we'll be able to have you again next time soon. I hope next week if you have the time. Yeah, and finally, thank you to the PALF team. This was really good coordination, and the meeting started immediately, right on time, and has ended right on time. So thanks again, and have a lovely evening. Remember to stay alive more than anything. Keep safe, and bye.
Thank you, guys.
So thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Peter. If you stay online, I'll be online for the next 4 or 5 minutes, just in order for us to share the link so you can sign up. And also Peter's email address will also come in the chat box. Thank you so much, Peter, for your time.
Thank you.
Not at all. Most welcome. It's been a great pleasure, and I also learned a lot.
Everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
There's no way the governor can afford to give away 64 grand.
We lost our stupid prize, not our clients. That's what matters. Yeah, but if this governor thing is really happening, what happened when we started? She's announcing the project next week.
We hope.
She signed a contract.
She also signed a contract at Capital Gold.
Anything to say, Kenya? Wakesho, anything from you? Koketso? Madinofe?
Not really, Itu. Just probably thanks again. Yeah.
Okay.
Or I could continue sending shout outs to Kenyans now that. I had two for joining. I think I said thank you to Flavia. Gerald has also just sent his email address. We will send everything to you guys. Juma, yeah, there's Juma Anuro. Thank you for joining us. Everyone, sorry if I couldn't send a shout out, but thanks for joining us.
Oh, terrific. No, thank you. Yeah, I think I think we'll just leave it at that. Let's leave it. Pass it on to Karina and Maru. So that you guys can wrap up.
Thank you. I think we're actually finished. I'll just ask everyone again. Thank you so much for sending your email addresses. But if you can also click on the Google link that I sent, so we can gather a little more information, because we predominantly communicate over a WhatsApp chat. So if you could fill the Google link I sent out, if you've already sent your email address, I will of course send the Google link to that email address as well. So thank you everybody, and have a lovely evening and stay safe.